Taoiseach, under Fine Gael's tenure, more and more community-led projects in Donegal are under constant threat of closure due to inadequate funding from your government. Despite many promises made that funding would be provided for in 2019 as part of the HSE capital plan, this has not transpired. Instead, parents and volunteers continue to fund and exert huge amounts of time and energy just to keep the doors of these vitally important services open, with still closure well in sight. This is a situation facing several community-led organisations in Donegal, such as Lifeline Inishowen, which provides support for women and children who experience domestic violence. However, it is constantly under threat of being shut down because they do not meet the government model of delivery of services as it is community-led. I raised this issue in my speech to the Council of Europe in Strasbourg, which coincided with the handing over of a petition of over 1,000 signatories from Lifeline and his own supporters to the Minister for Support in Leinster House back in a number of months ago. And still there has been no progress to date. This is despite the fact that Lifeline has stepped in where the government has consistently stepped out, provided a service in an area where the next service is in Letterkenny, over 60 kilometres away, and a 2-hour round trip for those finding themselves in an emergency situation. Taoiseach, how can we have a situation where Ireland has finally ratified the Istanbul Convention, an international instrument to combat domestic violence, just last year, yet here we have a situation where victims of domestic abuse are being further marginalised by your government? Among the tenets of the Istanbul Convention is that state parties implement comprehensive and coordinated policies involving government agencies, NGOs, and as well as national, regional and local parliaments and authorities. Taoiseach, we have also ratified the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities. Yet here we are in a similar situation with iCare, also in Inishowen and set up in 2000. I had the pleasure of visiting the iCare facility to meet with the staff and service users and saw firsthand the incredible work carried out by the project to provide much-needed educational, social and respite services for children with autism and their families. It was clear that this community-led model works. However, as has been the case across the country under your government, funding is constantly running out and iCare is constantly under threat of closure, despite it being marked as value for money and despite it being the HSE using the facility and sending children to it and referring children to it. And also the Blue Stack Foundation has received €36,000 from the HSE in February, with the understanding that it was an interim payment until the estimates for 2019 were completed. Still waiting for a government response, places like Blue Stacks, the iCare are in need of serious sustainable funding commitments from yourself and government, particularly as demand for their services is increasing all the time. The fact that these community-led services were established by concerned parents to serve as a particular local need and are under threat of closure says it all about your priorities. Taoiseach, will you secure long-term multi-annual funding for iCare, the Blue Stack Foundation and Lifeline so that these vital services can continue to provide important support to people in the local areas, recognising the fact that we have ratified both the Istanbul Convention and the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities?
Thank you. Deputy Pringle, Taoiseach.
Thanks. I want to thank Deputy Pringle for raising the very important issue of funding for community-led organisations in Donegal, including Lifeline and iCare. I'm afraid I am at a disadvantage in that I didn't know that this issue was going to be raised on Leaders' Questions, so I don't have an up-to-date note on funding for either of those organisations, but I will seek it and ensure that it is passed on to your office. In relation to the wider question of domestic violence, yes, this government has ratified the Istanbul Convention, updated our laws with regard to domestic violence, and we are increasing funding for those organisations that support men and women who are victims of domestic violence, and that will continue to be the case. And I'm very proud to have led the government that at long last ratified the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, but we need to make that real. And we do now have record levels of funding going into disability services. But the funding will never be enough. There will always be more to be done. There will always be needs to be met. But so long as we manage the economy well, so long as we look after our public finances, every year we'll be able to make things that little bit better, increasing funding for those organisations that work with people who have disabilities and those who are victims of gender-based violence.
Pringle.
Taoiseach, thank you for your response and that you'll respond to me directly in relation to what the current funding situation is for these organisations. But the current funding situation for them is, as I have outlined in my introduction here, and that's the problem, is that there is no plans and no support for these organisations. And these are community-led responses to where government hasn't been providing a response. And I thought it was very interesting in your previous response, you talked about how great it was that we had a budget excess and everything like that there. But this is the price of it. And this is why we have budget excess, because you do not support local organisations that are providing much needed services that you are not providing and that you are not funding. And I would far rather us have a 0.5% deficit and provide these services and provide funding for these services right across the country than to be standing up here and crowing about how we have a budget surplus. Because unfortunately, Taoiseach, a budget surplus means that people are going to be put at risk right across our country, and that's the reality of the situation. And I would like, if you do provide an update, that there will be an update to say that these organisations will be funded into the future.
Thank you, Deputy Pringle. Taoiseach, to conclude.
Thanks, Deputy. I think you make a very articulate case in favour of increasing public spending year on year. And as you know, the budget that we're planning at the moment increases public spending, or will increase public spending by about 2.8 billion next year, and some of that will be for health services, disability, and those who are victims of domestic violence. I'd be tempted almost to send you in on my behalf to meet the Irish Fiscal Advisory Council and perhaps suggest to them as to what the social consequences may be of running the bigger surplus that they're demanding of us. And it is a balance that any government has to do, to listen to those who advise us to spend less and to build up a bigger surplus to prepare for bad times that may come in the future, and of course the need to meet enormous demands and needs across our society. And we have to get that balance right, and I think we do get it right. In relation to those organisations, I will seek information on their funding. I'll take a look at it myself, and I'll make sure that that gets passed on to your office.